I'm unhappy, she said, fidgeting with her wedding ring. I don't want an arrangement. I want a marriage. And just like that, she threatened to throw everything she worked for away. They skipped the honeymoon and went straight to adjusting to living together. As part of their agreement, they were to sleep in separate bedrooms. They drew straws to see who got the master bedroom and who was stuck with the spare that doubled as a walk in closet. She protested the results, but only half heartedly. It was her idea and she lost, fair and square. Besides, he was the one with the bad back, and the spare room was closer to her working area. It was the sensible thing to do at the time, and separate bedrooms were a practical measure. The first few nights were fine, apart from her tendency to be loud when she wandered into the kitchen in the dark of night. Things like pots and pans hadn't been fully unpacked yet, and neither of them knew what to do with the kitchen-related wedding gifts like food processors and coffee makers, especially since neither of them drank coffee. She was sure that the noise she made as she bumbled around in the dark woke him up, with the walls being thinner than either of them liked, but he never said a word, never complained. So it was to her surprise when, about a week after, she saw he installed a small light near the kitchen counter, and the little pantry she kept filled with snacks also had a light rigged to come to life when she opened the door. He must really want a good night's sleep, she guessed. Earlier that year, not that long after the smell of fireworks finally cleared the air and people could sleep at night again, she came home late from a client meeting that didn't care it was a holiday. Whenever those happened, her usual plan was just take time to herself and get some sleep. She couldn't say what was different about that specific instance, what whim of circumstance made her do something other than grab a quick bite to eat and slowly go through the motions that led to sleep. No, that night something else was done, and she couldn't explain what made her do it. No, instead, she caught sight of her husband. He'd fallen asleep on the couch. The TV was off and the remote was on the coffee table, untouched from where she left it earlier that day. He had an empty bowl and a plastic fork in his hands, and she caught, her nose was always sharp about those things, the smell of cheap ingredients and lazy preparation. Had he fallen asleep on the couch eating a bowl of instant noodles? That seemed the likely case, though why she couldn't fathom. She knew he hadn't touched that in years. Not since before they were married, in fact. She looked at him as he slept. He wasn't handsome, but he wasn't bad looking either. Normal. Aggressively so if someone pressed her for the truth. That was the first thing she noticed about him when they first met. He looked so unspeakably, impossibly average that she couldn't be sure she didn't dream him up, that someone chose all the bland and default options of a video game character creation screen and called it an actual human being. But he was real, and he wasn't in costume or the product of a development process. He really did just look aggressively normal, which was a superlative quality from the right point of view. She couldn't quite dispute that. She reached for the bowl and stopped, deciding mid-movement that waking him wasn't for the best. Not that he wasn't a morning person. On the contrary, he woke up before she did most of the time. No, she chose to leave things as they were because she couldn't remember the last time he didn't sleep in his own bed. It would teach him not to fall asleep in strange places. And as she straightened herself, she saw the little object beside him that she didn't see earlier. A book. A short story collection, to be precise, with the spine well worn. His favorite work from his favorite author, and something she got him as a gift the year before. It was wrapped in clear plastic, as a sort of makeshift dust jacket, just like all of his other books. She made a note to see what else the author wrote in the intervening years and check his bookshelf for anything missing. It would make it for a nice gift for a friend. They were friends before they were husband and wife, after all. The weather was warm but not muggy. Low humidity, a slight breeze that didn't so much ruffle her hair as lightly nudge a few strands loose, and the sun decided to cooperate for once with her then active interest in photography. She wasn't going professional or anything, but it was a way to pass the time between commissions and during the spring lull when she took a quick break from her bigger projects. The time of year when whatever it was her husband dabbled in for a living, which she was certain was perfectly legal, if curiously difficult to explain in ways an outsider could understand, was more active and more profitable. She had more time on her hands than she knew what to do with, and taking up a hobby seemed like a reasonable thing to do. He didn't think she'd stick with it. She tried learning how to play the piano, chess, and basket weaving in the time they'd known each other, and she'd gotten tired of each of them in turn. Her only true passion was art and illustration, he said. She wasn't inclined to tell him he was wrong. The problem, of course, was that she didn't like taking pictures of people. It was rude, and she never had much interest in capturing the lives and moments of real human beings. Too banal, too much like what she wanted to escape from. And she preferred the process of making them whole cloth, breathing life into a sketch by wondering what the details of their lives were, like an author of fiction, but with pictures instead of words. Nature was a possible subject, but she got tired of that fast. It was too easy to make a sunset or a grove of trees look beautiful. Not enough challenge, not enough effort put in for her to care about what she put out. He pointed out there were photographers that slaved for hours for perfect nature shots, and she didn't care. Nature had too much inherent beauty, by her standards, for her to enjoy taking pictures of it. So she took pictures of architecture instead, but this posed a problem. Their hometown wasn't exactly the best place for architecture. Too much of it was utilitarian, that harsh and lifeless brutalist style that she hated to look at, because it reminded her too much of the corporate slog that she used to live under, and how it grounded her down little by little until she snapped and walked out because she couldn't take it anymore. Not that she considered her personal feelings a value judgment on the style, she just didn't like it by association. She returned home early. Her clothes clung to her skin, and she didn't like the stench of her own sweat, and there was nothing but cold, hard, brutalist buildings all around. She needed something else. Ah, if she could just go to Rome or Milan or Siena or Florence or Venice. Places with beautiful architecture and that old world charm she wondered if she could capture on film, because she didn't think digital cameras were the right way to go for her. There was something more tangible and more personal about film cameras that made it feel right. As she put her camera down on the kitchen counter, he glanced away from the book he was reading to look at her. Hey, do you want to go to Rome? She'd never said yes faster in her life. On their first anniversary, he got her an office chair. It was a good chair, sturdy plastic, adjustable height as was standard, but also adjustable back support and armrests. The cushioning was comfortable, but not enough that she'd be tempted to sit in it all day long. The wheels didn't squeak when she moved around, and she enjoyed spinning round and round in it when she wasn't busy at her desk. But she never asked for an office chair, and honestly didn't know why he got her one. She tried to figure it out, of course. Had she signaled him that she wanted one in some way? No, she was sure she didn't. Had he noticed the old chair had damage she didn't notice? No, she'd have known if there was. Had he gotten tired of how the wheels of the old one scuffed the finish on their nice floors? No, because that never happened. It took her a week to give up and just ask. He responded, "You look like you needed one with better back support." And that was that. He didn't think it was worth dwelling on, and neither did she. It was spring the year before when she made the decision to tell him what she wanted, even if that meant breaking their agreement, one that she'd kept true for so long. The decision happened upon her in what she remembered to be a time of great work-related stress and a single shining moment of clarity that burst like violent buckshot through the bubbling muck and morass that was the unappreciated and undervalued life of a freelance artist who didn't build a prominent profile. She had a commission. It paid half up front because she wasn't an idiot, and that half alone was more than she made in half a year. But the demands were strict and the timetable as tight as the vice grip of a murderous harpy who finally tired of her controlling mother's combination of cooing narcissism and guilt-based parenting and would not let her go until something else snapped. Not that she ever thought of doing that to her own husband. Rather, she and he specifically had an arrangement that let them avoid such nonsense. Truth be told, she wasn't sure how it happened. She could imagine it, but that was filling in blanks rather than knowing for sure. But the facts of that moment, as laid out in her mind and sorted from the jumbled papers of unformed memory and blatant speculation, were thus. First, she fell asleep at her work desk. How she managed not to splat her face right on the screen of her drawing tablet and ruin what she was working on, she had no idea. Second, she most certainly did not wake up until morning, later than her usual routine, though she'd been up later than usual as well, At least as far as she recalled. An hour, give or take, was her best estimate. Third, there was a cup of tea ready, green tea with just a hint of fresh lemon, still hot but cooled enough for her to drink right away, served in her favorite little teacup, with the many cracks mended with lacquer and silver dust, a little souvenir of her years in Japan. Fourth, a little note jesting that if she planned to abandon the use of her bed, there was the option to sell it. She laughed. He wasn't there anymore, headed off to engage in his own particular routine, being that he was a man who had to build his own because he disengaged from the aspects of society that threatened to build one for him, and he refused to live that way and found another way instead. She laughed because he knew he wasn't around to hear, but as she took a sip of the tea, that perfectly timed tea, she wished he was there to hear. And that's the moment she decided to tell him. He had a right to know, and she had a right to have what she wanted, or at least to reach for it, didn't she? They had a little trash can at their place. Pink plastic, because he liked pink things. The kind with a tiny pedal that you stepped on to open the lid, and if you let go, the lid closed. Once upon a time, she caught him stepping on and off that little pedal to make that lid open and close. He'd done it at varying intervals, and from a generous and imaginative eye, it looked almost like the trash can talked to him. In fact, he'd seen it the same way and held a conversation with the little trash can as she watched. She couldn't remember what it was about. Something about luxury cardboard rectangles and plans to sell out of the hobby. But he planned to keep a few pieces, for nostalgia's sake. She didn't understand the specifics, enamored as she was with the notion of just carrying out a conversation with a trash can. It kept happening, of course, with new topics each time, and she couldn't remember the last time she saw the trash can with any actual trash in it. You really like talking to the trash can, don't you? Her name is Isabel. He sounded so offended that she hadn't given a trash can the dignity it deserved. She laughed. 2 days later, she drew the scene on a whim. It was a rough sketch, not something worth using for a portfolio. Something more private, maybe become an in-joke between them. They were married, and every married couple had those, so it seemed like a good way to add some depth to the sham. Just for laughs, she added little hearts and colored the sketch in bright pastels. She thought, maybe it really does get easier. Alone in that little room, the only sounds were her tears and the droning hum of a refrigerator. Summer danced into it and radiated through the brickwork and into their clothes, lingered enough to leave the skin sticky and unpleasant. She was dressed in formal clothes that itched and grew less and less welcome as the heat wore on and the hours passed. Her father was dead. It was quiet, expected, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. She kept it together as best she could. She was the eldest of 4 siblings and more or less the head of the family, with the fact that their part of it got cut off from the rest of the larger clan years ago over a dispute of inheritance forcing that position upon her. She had to be strong, to provide some sort of anchor for her siblings so they could carry on or feel all right and show some vulnerability. She could keep it together long enough to give them that. She had to. But the moment they were alone in a little room in the funeral home, when the others were gone and it was just him and her, she planted herself into a chair and started to sob. She didn't say anything. She didn't ask for anything. All she did was sob for a good 10 minutes, engaging in that cathartic release she'd forced herself to go without for so long. And then the sobbing became crying, louder and more insistent, a flood of emotion that found the tiniest gap in a dam and decided to batter through with all the force it could muster. And then he sat down and held her hand. He said nothing, just sat there and held her hand. Whatever went through his mind was left unspoken, and she didn't think she'd have heard a word of it even if he spoke. Her focus was entirely on letting it all flow out, with only the barest and smallest scrap of notice left behind for understanding and appreciating that through it all he held her hand. She asked for nothing. He gave anyway. Only later, so much longer later, that the thought of bringing it up again was absurd because it was possible he didn't remember the moment anymore, even if she did with stunning clarity. Did she realize she never thanked him? Might as well have stabbed him in the back, she thought. As the seasons were starting to prance over, from the mild chill of autumn to the first touch of frigid winter, she had observed a change in herself she hadn't expected, and one she wanted even less. But never prone to self-deception, she had to admit, upon meditation and analysis of her emotional state, that she was in love. The realization was caused by a small and insignificant thing, the kind of thing she and he had done for each other since their whole arrangement began. She was cold that day. She always got colder before anyone else did, and often joked that she was cursed to be the herald of frost. It was a thing she learned to live with and adapt to, but something about the weather that year really settled in early as far as she was concerned. She shivered even under 2 layers, and she considered adding a third, but worried that such a thing made her look odd so far ahead of the first snowfall of the year. Resigned to drinking more tea than usual and maybe fixing herself a bowl of hot soup, she sat down in the warmest part of their little home and resisted the urge to sneer at the japes of Mother Nature. And then, without a word or warning, he threw a blanket over her. His blanket, a soft and supple silk blanket. It was the one thing that wasn't one of his personal gadget and tools that he was possessive about. His most personal luxury that she never so much as touched in all the time they'd known each other. You looked cold. That was all the explanation he gave, curt to the point, and not really an answer at all. She thanked him as he left on his routine. The click of the door coincided with the unwelcome truth. She had fallen in love with her husband. They'd known each other as friends for 3 years. Close, but not too close. They enjoyed each other's company and had a few topics they could talk about, but lacked enough in common to really develop any emotional intimacy. No attempt at dating was ever made, but they had just enough awareness of each other's mental state and perspective that they felt they could trust each other, and that was one of the factors that led to their sham marriage. They would get married, they would live together, they would share assets. They would make every effort to appear like an ordinary, mundane married couple. But there was no love there. No romantic connection existed or could be allowed to exist. No desire or passion for the other, save perhaps the general congeniality and concern that friends had for one another. It wasn't for nothing. They both stood to gain from it. He got his hyper-traditionalist family off his back so he could live in peace and carry on with minimal change to the lifestyle of his choice. She got the myriad of tax benefits that came with marriage, along with the peace of mind of getting most unwanted suitors to back off. And both of them found someone they could trust and had easy access to without needing to tangle with the complexities of romantic connections. Not a marriage, but an arrangement. One that suited them both. So it's settled then. We're getting married, he said. If you can call it that. Marriage is for romantics. Then let's call it a transaction, he said. Such a cold way of seeing it, but also the truth. And we can't let ourselves fall in love with each other. Agreed, it would be problematic. Opens us to some of the things we both want to avoid. He nodded. It won't be easy keeping up the sham. I can live with that, she declared. Let's get married. She was happy. She didn't want a marriage, only an arrangement.